You take your first dose of 5 grams of creatine. A small amount of this 5 grams is absorbed into your muscles almost immediately, like 1 to 2%. No visible change, you can't really feel anything. Your muscle tank is just starting to fill. If you continue on taking 5 grams per day for an entire week, your muscles and your muscle cells begin to slowly saturate with creatine and with water. You might notice a 1 to 2 pound jump on the scale, that's just water, and slightly fuller muscle appearance, especially when you get a pump. Week 2, your muscles' creatine stores are like 50 to 70% saturated now. Remember, you already have some creatine stored in your cells without supplementation at all. But when you supplement, you can take those creatine stores from pretty much empty to a full tank. By now, your phosphocreatine levels have risen enough to make a little bit of a difference in short bursts. Faster recovery, pumps that last longer post-workout, and a little bit more stamina. Maybe you can get in 1 extra rep during your set. Now, don't stop there. You want to keep going because between weeks 3 and 4, your muscles are almost near full saturation. This is where your performance benefits start to actually peak. Now you might be able to even add a little bit more weight to your compound lifts, and recovery between training sessions feels even better. As you continue supplementing and get to weeks 5 through 8, you're not really getting an extra gain. You've kind of peaked your creatine levels. But what you've done is leveled up your baseline performance. Your strength continues to improve, but now it's from those extra reps. You might notice muscle definition improve from higher volume over time. Basically every session, now that your baseline is up there, you get better and better. You've got a little extra push and those gains will compound. That's your creatine timeline. Now, what happens when you stop? In this video, I'm gonna answer a lot of the questions that I didn't get to in my creatine challenge. Let's get into it. This is the second video where I'm pretty much telling you to ingest a white powdery substance. Let's go into what creatine is doing and why you actually might want it. So your little muscles are using fuel to lift, run, or jump. When you're doing those things in short bursts with more explosive movement, more explosive power, it uses a specific type of fuel called ATP. ATP is like a little spark that makes your muscles go. In fact, it's not even like a spark, it is a spark because that ATP is used up in just a few seconds. So your body needs time to rebuild up that ATP. That's why when you sprint, you can only sprint really explosively for only so long. When you use it, that ATP needs a little bit of time to replenish. So what rebuilds that ATP faster? Creatine. So every session, you've got more energy, and that's more energy for specifically movement and workouts where you're running fast, lifting heavy, you're doing more explosive stuff. That's why people who love building muscle and love getting stronger recommend creatine so often. It really does help specifically those of us who are in the gym, training really hard, pushing ourselves, pushing our max, and looking for PRs. Okay, next let's talk about the brain benefits. So many of you guys asked me whether or not I will increase my dosage from the last video. I currently only take 5 grams of creatine per day, but very recently we can now say with a high degree of confidence that creatine can add some pretty amazing cognitive benefits with higher doses, especially when you're sleep deprived. So here's what we learned from a small study. Researchers kept people awake for 21 hours. They took the same people and did 2 different tests. One night the subjects took a placebo, and then another night they took creatine monohydrate doses at 6 p.m., midnight, 2 a.m., and 4 a.m. Throughout the night, they gave the individuals cognitive tests. So they were testing like their reaction speed, their language, their reasoning, memory tasks, and they also took brain scans. What's crazy is that when they dosed with creatine, the subjects had 25 to 30% better recall, they had sharper reactions, and when scores declined as fatigue increased, that makes sense, the creatine group maintained on logical reasoning and working memory. That to me is unbelievable. That is awesome. So what this tells us is if we are sleep deprived and we can take a high dose of creatine, it seems like you can protect yourself from the inevitable acute like cognitive decline, just like not being really sharp and not being in your best mindset when you take creatine. So you guys know I'm a mom of 2 young kids and I have plenty of nights where I'm not getting enough sleep. Like most nights I'm not getting enough sleep. However, although this sounds awesome to me, I will personally be skipping these higher doses until I'm finished nursing. I feel really comfortable with the 5 grams per day while I'm still nursing. It's not not a ton of creatine to be passing along to my baby. However, when you introduce these intermittent high doses of creatine, we just don't know anything, and it just seems like too much creatine for some benefit that I'm just gonna have to live with. I've been living with it for the past 4 years, so I'll be okay for the next couple of months until I'm finished nursing. This study is so promising. I guess the biggest thing that we need to worry about is one of the most common complaints about creatine, which is GI upset. This is part of the reason why I recommend to not ever cycle on or cycle off creatine or do a creatine loading phase, is because a lot of people do experience a tummy ache whenever they have high amounts of creatine, but it seems like in the study they are separating their doses. They're not just taking like 20 grams at one time, they're splitting it up intermittently. So I would recommend doing that if you are taking higher doses, but super interesting research and very cool to see how this develops, and in studies to come, what else we learn about creatine and how it affects our brains. While we're on the topic of GI distress, I do want to talk about bloating and holding on to water and what that means when you're on creatine. A common question that people ask is like, oh, are you holding on to more water when you're using creatine? So let's get into it. Creatine is pulling water into your muscle cells. It's stored in those muscle cells along with some water. So when you increase your creatine stores, your muscle cell holds more creatine phosphate and attracts water to balance that. The water storage in your muscle cells is not the same thing as bloating or feeling bloated. I have 4 tips to avoid bloating when you're starting to take creatine or getting used to it. 1, skip that loading phase. You don't need to do it. Start with 5 grams per day, or even start with 3 grams per day and ramp up to that 5 gram dosage. 2, stay hydrated throughout the day and take your creatine with some water. 3, take the creatine with a meal. This isn't something that most people need to do, but if you're having struggles or if you're prone to tummy upset, then take your creatine with food as well. And 4, you can split up your dose, kind of like they do in that study that I mentioned earlier. Split up your dose in a morning or take it with all your meals so that you're having a little bit, 1 gram or 2 grams at multiple points in the day. Okay, next let's get into all the different ways that you can take creatine. A lot of people ask me all the time about creatine gummies and whether or not those are effective. My preferred source is a creatine monohydrate. This is the gold standard. This is what is used in 95% of the creatine research that we have. An added bonus, this is also the most affordable form. The most common alternative to monohydrate is HCl. It's creatine bonded to a hydrochloride molecule. That makes it dissolve a little bit better in water, and the thought there is, oh, if it can dissolve better in water, then it'll be better on my tummy and make it easier for some people to digest. If you look at the Reddit group r/creatine, there are a ton of people who say they prefer HCl over monohydrate. Currently, there isn't anything in the research that shows a difference between monohydrate and HCl, and price is a huge con. HCl costs like between 2 to 4 times the amount of a regular monohydrate. So those are the 2 forms of creatine. You can take those 2 forms and ingest them in a bunch of different ways. Let's talk about that. You have powders that dissolve in water, and you can get powders in an unflavored version or a flavored version. You can take them in capsule form, pre-mixed RTDs, ready to drinks, our creatine gummies that we'll talk about, and in the candy theme, you can also get like tablets. The issue with most of these forms is that they run the risk of being underdosed. You're here on YouTube, so you probably watched James Smith's scandal video where he investigates the underdosing of creatine gummies, and it's a huge scandal. And in my opinion, taking creatine in a powder form in water just isn't hard. Creatine dissolves really well in water, so you can mix it with any liquid that you're having throughout the day, and it doesn't really affect your life that much. In my opinion, the different kind of forms like gummies or even the capsules, which isn't really a problem, it's just kind of annoying to take like 5 grams worth of creatine capsules. They're kind of like solving for problems that aren't really there and making creatine a little bit more sexy, which I like, but you get some cons with that. It just kind of gives you a new form of taking it just for the sake of it rather than solving any problem. This is a great segue in talking about third-party testing. The issue with underdosing brings in a really important point. Supplements are not regulated by the government, so it's gonna be up to the brand to make sure that what's inside the jar is what's on the label. There are some brands that go out of their way for third-party testing. This is what separates a legit brand from a sketchy one, so keep your eyes open as you're shopping. Third-party testing looks for things like purity, potency, and contaminants like heavy metals, microbes, and banned substances. You can protect yourself against underdosing and completely wasting your money, and you can better protect yourself against more serious risks like contamination in supplements or false label claims. In this conversation, people often ignore that underdosing happens all the time. Contamination happens, and sometimes brands are legit sketchy. Sometimes brands are putting in banned substances into their products and selling them to specific consumers, so people unknowingly are buying banned substances. It is a Google search away to look at popular brands now that their owner used to own another brand and some sketchy shit went down. Like, it does happen. Biggest thing here is get a brand that conducts multiple tests and is also really transparent about what the kind of tests that they're doing. So you've been taking your creatine for months and months and something happens. Maybe you go on vacation, maybe you ran out and there's a creatine shortage. That actually did happen during COVID. For whatever reason, you stop taking it. What is going to happen to you and your body and your muscles and your strength when you stop taking creatine? Happily, you'd still have the gains that you created. Remember, the creatine itself is not what is helping you lift heavier, or the creatine itself did not build the muscles. You worked hard and you were using creatine. It did give you that little bit of extra ATP that meant you could add a few pounds, you could add an extra rep here or there. That extra energy, session in and session out over a longer period of time, it stays with you. That's the good news. It's just that you won't have that extra ATP in subsequent sessions after you're off. There was one cool study that found that there was no lean tissue loss when people cycled off, but there's also no good reason to start again and stop again and start again. Good reasons for stopping are kind of common sense, like it doesn't fit with your lifestyle, you're not currently lifting, or you can't afford it anymore. Which, if you can't afford it anymore, then use code megsquats and you can save. Of course, this is assuming that you're healthy and your doctor isn't advising against it. So anyway, I hope that this video helped answer some of the more in-depth creatine questions. If you have any more, please leave them in the comments below and I will answer anything that you want. Of course, the creatine that I use is from Buff Chick Supplements. We are third-party tested and I do own the brand. We exist really to support women in strength training and women who are serious about lifting heavy weights and getting stronger. And of course, some supplements can help you do that, like creatine. And if you haven't already seen my creatine transformation video, then check that out next. Bye.